Have you ever felt powerless as a man? Lord knows there's been many instances in my life where I felt powerless. Like when my first son was being born and the doctors rushed in because they were losing his heartbeat and they couldn't get him out. All at the same time watching my wife scream in excruciating pain that I couldn't take away. And even though that moment in time was hard, I at least got to be there and see my son be born. But what if you never got a shot to even get to the delivery room? What if you got your girlfriend pregnant and even though it was a surprise, you were excited about being a father, but she decided that she didn't want the child, and no matter how much you pleaded with her, no matter how much you told her that you would take the baby if she didn't want it, she decided to get rid of the baby without ever considering you. She and society at large rendered you powerless. What do you do as a man in that scenario? That's what we're going to find out today. What's going on, fellas? Welcome to Alpha Dad Consulting. I am your host, G. Vidal, and on this show, we focus on empowering the everyday family man to become an effective family leader. We do this by sharing tactics, strategies, resources, and conversations with incredible men that are playing this family leadership game at a high level. On this episode, I had the honor and privilege of interviewing another fellow Apogee brother, Sean Corcoran. Sean has an incredible story, from falling into a deep depression that resulted in him going down a 7-year path of self-destruction. He ended up homeless and addicted to one of the hardest drugs out there to break free from. After his incredible recovery from that world, he went back to law school and had a successful career as a divorce and custody attorney, only to find that his success as a lawyer was causing him to be absent as a husband and father to his 5 kids. So in 2021, he closed up shop and stopped taking clients in order to be more present at home. He now has a growing podcast called The Father's Calling, where he's interviewing men with incredible stories who are living out their God-given purpose. Sean truly is an amazing man who wants to use his story and experiences to help other family men avoid the pitfalls he fell into so that they can be the best version of themselves for their family. Please enjoy our conversation as we explore his story and extract the lessons from Sean's life that can help us become better leaders for our own family. Let's go.
I can see the enemy approaching the battleground. Hear the drums pound like a thunder sound loud. I gather up my crowd to prepare them for what's coming. We've been summoned.
All right, Mr. Sean Corcoran, how are you, my brother?
I'm good, G. How are you today?
I'm doing well, man. Excited to have you on. For those of you listening, Sean and I met through the Apogee Strong program through Matt Boudreau and Tim Kennedy, and we've been kind of interacting because Sean just started his podcast a little while ago, The Father's Calling, who I just had the privilege and the honor of being on that show just recently, which was amazing. So of course I had to bring Sean on and bring him on and actually share his story with you guys. And I think you guys are going to really love this episode because Sean has just an incredible story that I was just talking to him right before we got started, and I told him, like, I feel like you've lived multiple lives, man, because you have a lot of things that you've gone through. And I believe that his story and a lot of the lessons that he's learned along the way are really going to help you guys with dealing with trials and tribulations that you may be going through right now as a result of whether it's vices, whether it's just you feeling like you can't carry on, man. And Sean's defeated a lot of that stuff. And you guys will see what I'm talking about here in a sec. But yeah, man, thank you so much for coming on. And let's go ahead and start there, man. I want to start with the family life. What was the family life for you growing up as a kid, and then getting into, becoming 18, 19, getting into adulthood? How did that go for you?
Well, I'm excited to be here too, and I appreciate this opportunity. So I would say that my family life growing up was a normal, I would say average family life. In the context of people whose parents stayed together. My dad worked, my mom stayed at home, and and we did feel a lot of love in our house. There was me, and I have a younger brother and a younger sister. And, I can tell you that and I think about this stuff a lot more now in the context of my own life and what I'm trying to do as a father and as a man. And so looking back, my dad worked very hard. He was the first person in his family to graduate from college. He grew up in a blue collar family, and he wanted to kind of break through that. So he was a very hard worker, and he had goals, and he achieved those goals. And he was very disciplined in his methodology in achieving those goals. And so what I mean by that is he worked a lot. He was an accountant and for some chemical plants, and he would get up very early and he would go to work. And if we had events, if we had extracurricular activities, especially athletics, he was always the coach. He was always present for those. But outside of that, he was working. And so like Saturday mornings, he would get up and he would go into the office to make up for whatever time that he lost, coaching us. So very present in the sense of being a coach, which is what he knew as a young man, and as a man, he knew sports. And so that was something he enjoyed, and that was something that he was able to kind of help us to grow in. So we played everything. It wasn't like it is now where kids play baseball 11 months out of the year. We played baseball, we played football, we played soccer, we played basketball. I did taekwondo. I learned piano. And so a very well-rounded childhood. We also moved a lot for his job. So I was born in Tallahassee, Florida. When I was 6, we moved to St. Louis, Missouri. When I was 8, we moved to Mobile, Alabama. When I was 10, we moved to Rochester, New York, where both of my parents are from. And then when I was 12, we moved to Lake Charles, Louisiana, where I still live. And that impacted me a lot, I think. And I know a lot more about this now, and I see it now in having no permanency. So, always feeling like I'm probably going to pick up and go somewhere. So never really being motivated to unpack boxes, for example. Or by the time we made it to Lake Charles, not really being motivated to make friends, because I expected that we would be here for 1.5 to 2 years. And so did my parents. And so I really had no desire to once again make a whole new set of friends and then pick up and leave them all.
When those moves happened, was it because of your dad's job, like him being an accountant? Was that what caused a lot of the moves that were very frequent, or was it just kind of a thing that you guys just did?
No, it was definitely with his job. We moved. He started out with Winchester. And then I think Winchester Rifles got bought out by Olin Chemicals, and he just kind of worked his way through the company and into management. And so he had a group. It was actually a small group of people in management that as they took promotions and moved to other regions, the whole group, kind of stayed together. So there were some families who lived in the same neighborhoods as us in Mobile, in Rochester, in Lake Charles, but all their kids were much younger than me. Mm. And so from a developmental standpoint or from a friend standpoint, there was just none of those connections. So yeah, it was definitely a constant reset. And to the point where I had zero desire to even visit a school in Louisiana by the time I was graduating high school. And I went to Florida State. I went for a year, and I had an amazing 1-year vacation. It did not end well. I had a great time. I was not prepared to be living on my own away I never really learned how to study. I never really learned how to do anything with school. I was always just kind of good at, as Matt Bodro says, the game of school. And so getting to college where everything was on my own and there wasn't any daily assignments and there wasn't any homework. And so I had to kind of figure out like what to study, when to party, when to do all that stuff. It just kind of went to the wayside because prior to that, I'd always just crammed the night before a test and done well. And that didn't work out for me in college, but I had a great time until my last semester. I met a girl and she got pregnant and real fast. And then she told me that she was going to have an abortion. And I grew up in the Catholic Church and we never really talked about sex. We never really talked about anything at all. However, it was clear that abortion was something that was not aligned with my values, much more than surface values. It was something that was really deep-seated belief against abortion, as abortion is murder. And so that affected me to the point where I spent the rest of the last semester or the second semester of my freshman year sitting in my dorm room, not leaving. I had my roommate just was kind enough to bring me food. Nobody really knew what was going on, but obviously he knew that I needed to eat. And so then I failed out of school. And I didn't really tell anybody what was going on. I went off. I had an internship in New York that summer. And while I was there, my dad got my grades. Fortunately, I was 2,000 miles away from him. So I didn't have to suffer the consequences in person. But I obviously did not go back to, actually, I was told by Florida State University that I was not invited to come back. No. So then I moved back to Lake Charles and I enrolled here at McNeese State University. And I did okay for a little bit, but there was still something going on inside. I still was just kind of searching to figure out what was going on. I never really dealt with the impact of the abortion on my life. And I didn't realize for many years, how large of an impact it had had. And so I just kind of went through the motions and I did okay for a semester. And then I started partying a lot more. I started doing drugs and I got really heavily involved in drugs, mostly cocaine, ecstasy. I was taking 6 to 7 ecstasy pills every Thursday, every Friday, every Saturday night. I was working at a restaurant for lunch. I was working at a restaurant for dinner. I was working in a bar after that. And then I was working in another bar late night. And then if there was time, I was going out after that. So I was really just living this party life. And for whatever reason, I think I had found an identity as someone in restaurants. And that's I don't know if you've ever worked in restaurants, but it can become a closed circle of people, not only in the restaurant that you work in, but also when everybody goes out afterwards and hangs out with other people that work in restaurants. And, and it just kind of continues. And then people who work in bars. And so I was the bartender who worked in restaurants, who was serving all the servers after they got off and then going out and partying even more. And that really continued. I would say it continued on a pretty steady path. It took a while for it to escalate, even though the way I just described it probably sounds like a huge escalation. I was functioning for quite some time, years. And I was functioning in the lifestyle that I just described. I failed out of college 2 more times and just stopped after that. And that's when it really escalated. That's when I became more heavily involved in meth, and I was really just kind of, that was it. That was all I was doing. I was working to pay for my methamphetamine habit. And because I was on meth, I was awake all the time, so I was working more. Most of the people who I had been partying with over the course of however many years had moved on in their lives, had graduated college, this was also at the same time as the September 11th attack. So several of my friends joined the military. Gotcha. and moved on that way. And so, but I just kept going. And I kept going until it was December 13th of 2005 when I found myself lying in a hotel room dying of a meth overdose. I should backtrack and just be honest about the other things that I was doing at the time. And I was gambling a lot because we have casinos here. And when you're awake by yourself after hours and can't go to sleep because of the drugs and there's nowhere else to go, I found myself in casinos just kind of playing video poker over and over and over, slot machines. And that created a whole nother level of dysfunction in my brain, in my life, to where now the money that I was previously making to buy drugs, somehow I had convinced myself that I would be able to buy more drugs and pay my bills, because I obviously wasn't paying my bills. And that doesn't work. The casino is not in the business of losing money. So then I was losing the money that I needed to buy the drugs and the money that I needed to pay my bills. And I had worked my way up into management in restaurants. So at that point, I decided to borrow, and in my mind, that's what I was doing. I was borrowing money from the daily receipts with the expectation of gambling, winning, even though I had never won over the course of however many years, gambling, winning, putting the money back before it was even logged in, and having the money I needed to pay my bills and buy drugs. And obviously that didn't work. I don't know if I was lucky. I don't know if I was blessed. I don't know really how to describe the several instances, because there were several instances of that happening, where I guess it was just a series of good people in my life in those positions that when I went and talked to them about what I had done, were willing to give me another chance. And so I don't know if that's good or bad, because it continued to happen. Mm-hmm. But on December 12th of 2005, that was like the last straw. I was called into the restaurant that morning. Actually, it was that night that I did it for the last time. I was called into the restaurant on the morning of the 13th and told to give them my keys. I'd already been kicked out of my house, so I'm homeless at this time. We had a hurricane in Lake Charles that allowed me to kind of loophole my way into a hotel, because the restaurant was open for the purpose of serving the first responders. And so they wanted the restaurant workers to have a place to stay. So there was just like, I don't know, 24 of the employees of the restaurant staying in, a handful of rooms in this hotel. The people that I had been staying with had chosen several days before this to remove themselves from the room I was in, probably because of the insanity that I was creating. Mm. So it was just me in a room that had no light bulbs, because I had taken all the light bulbs and used them for meth pipes, except for one light bulb over the bathroom sink. And so the restaurant said, you need to go back to the room and you need to wait, because the police are coming and they're going to, want to have a conversation with you about this. And I think I think what a lot of people who, not to sugarcoat it, but a lot of people who commit crimes, once they know that they've been caught, there's no reason to run. You know, once you know that you've been caught, once you've beaten yourself down to the point where there's nothing left, you just kind of accept that. And so that's what I did. I mean, I had no intention of leaving. I wasn't going to be running from the police.
Yeah.
You know, I knew that I had done something wrong. I knew that I probably should have paid consequences way sooner than this. And so now it was my time to pay the consequences. So I went back to the room, and I had however much of the methamphetamine left. And I just went to work and used it all. I wasn't doing it for the purpose of anything other than I had nothing else to do. You know, there wasn't a goal of, hey, I'm just going to use all this meth and see if I live. I didn't want to die. I just didn't have anything else to do. And that was my coping mechanism. And so I did that. And this wasn't the first time that I experienced this, but it was a more profound experience where I kind of was paralyzed. You know, I couldn't really move. So I'm lying on the floor of this dirty, I mean, filthy. There was no room service or laundry service or anything at this time because of the hurricanes. So there's a filthy hotel, and I'm just lying on the carpet on the floor in front of the bathroom sink where the single light bulb was. And it became paralyzed, and I'm just like expecting to die. And I was praying. I was praying about that, you know, about how my parents were going to find me. You know, not want. I don't know why I laugh. It's not funny, but not wanting to be found as a disappointment, right? One last disappointment. This is how Sean goes out. He dies of an overdose on a hotel floor. And so I prayed, and then I fell asleep. And I know that sounds weird from people that understand how stimulants work, but I was so overstimulated and also so underslept.
Yeah.
I guess for lack of a better word. I mean, I hadn't slept in weeks. And so I don't think there's any amount of drugs that could have kept me awake. I just kind of passed out. And when I woke up, it was just an immediate thought. Immediately, I woke up. I mean, immediately when I woke up was this thought that there was a pamphlet for a treatment center that had been in my truck that I was living out of for at least 2 years. And I don't know if I knew for sure that it was in there. I just had this feeling, and I went out to the parking lot, and I went to my truck, and I found this pamphlet that was in there with everything else that I owned. And I called the treatment center, and they told me that they had a bed and that I could go there that day. You know, I'm kind of debating in my head, like, do I just take off? Or, you know, I was told to stay here. And so I called my dad. We hadn't talked in weeks. And I just kind of told him what happened. I told him, you know, the thought that I was having about the treatment center, and just asked what he thought I should do. And he told me that his advice was to just call the regional manager of the restaurant, tell him this is where I'm going, this is what I'm going to do. I'll settle up with you when I get back. And I did that, and I left. So this truck, this little S10, Chevy S10 that I had, that I'd been living out of at a time when I wasn't taking care of myself, much less any of my things, hadn't had an oil change in years. It was really beat up. I shouldn't have made it out of the parking lot. And I drove it, I think it's like 4 hours to the treatment center through a forest where the entire time I'm just praying. The entire time, please don't break down. Please don't break down. Please don't break down. Because it should have broken down, and I would have been broken down in the middle of a forest. And then it gets to the hills, and I'm like, no way this truck's making it up hills. And it made it. It didn't sound good, but it made it up the hills and down the hills, and then it actually, my truck made it into the parking lot of the treatment center, and it died.
Wow.
And so then I had to push it into a parking spot. And I was beyond taking signs. I can look at that now and say, man, this is clearly what was supposed to happen. But at that point, I was just glad that I was someplace I was supposed to be and not stuck in a forest. And so I went in and I said, hey, I need to call my dad and tell him that I made it. And the lady said, oh, well, your dad's already called and they already got all the information and they're going to be here this weekend. And, I didn't tell the part about the reason I got kicked out of the house was because while my parents were evacuated from the hurricane, I had signed up for a credit card in my dad's name with his Social Security number and gotten that in the mail and taken it and gotten cash out of it to gamble with. So it'd been weeks. I'd say probably been about 3 weeks since we'd spoken, since he put a bag on the door and said, come get your stuff and don't come back. And that wasn't the first time that I had violated my family's trust while I was living this lifestyle. And so with all the things that I had done, to hear that my dad had already called and was already prepared to drive up there on the weekend, that was a really special experience. And something that not only is it something that I'll never forget, but something that I need to make sure that I remember as I'm raising my own children and they make whatever mistakes they make. And so really that was just a huge blessing from God. My family was there every weekend. I was there for 45 days. They were there every weekend. And it was a 30-day program, but every 2 weeks, the people that had been there, however many people, 3-4 people that had been there the longest, got to have a family weekend with like immersive, bringing the family into the discussions about recovery. And so I was not leaving that place until my family and I got to have those conversations around healing. And it didn't really work that way. I was still really messed up in the head. I'm sure I made that an incredibly uncomfortable family weekend for my entire family. Lots of blaming, lots of victim, all the things that addicts do during their addiction and in the early stages of recovery. And so, but I experienced that and then we left. And I got a second chance. I was able to move home with my family. I was able to start, and it was a long process, but to start building their trust.
Before you carry on, I want to kind of touch on a few things because, first off, man, like, thank you for sharing that because that's freaking powerful. It's a powerful testimony of coming back from something like that. We talk about this in Apogee a lot in terms of, what does it take for a man to be willing to change, right? To be willing to change his behaviors, his to get rid of his vices, to get rid of, to become a different person, right? To become a better man. And, we hear it from our mentors all the time that come on Apogee that there's always this like rock bottom moment that they hit that forces them to have no other choice but to change, or else the alternative is like what you almost faced, which was death, right? Or going to jail or the worst of the worst. And what's crazy about your story, and this is some of the things that I picked up on. What I want to go back to at the beginning when you were talking about Michael, right?
Yeah, I didn't think I said that, but that's right.
Yeah. Michael, I know you mentioned that to me offline.
Yeah.
That Michael was going to be the name, or is the name of your son, the one that you would have been able to have had this girl not decided to have an abortion. I want to go back to that, just touch on that briefly in terms of, did you have a conversation with her in terms of
So
like,
many.
hey, a lot, okay, yeah.
Wait,
In
I'm
terms
sorry.
of
I
like,
shouldn't have cut you off. You mean
no, you're good.
after
You're
we
good.
found out she was pregnant?
Yeah. After
Yeah.
you found out, yeah. And how was that, man? Because this was what, late 90s, early 2000s, or
This would have been 1997, January 1997.
gotcha. Okay. Where it wasn't, if I'm remembering correctly, like it wasn't as prevalent to have abortions as freely as it is now, right? Like where the feminist movement and all that stuff that they propagate in terms of like, hey, this is empowering for women to get rid of their children and to not have children and to do this and that, right? At that time, how did you even think that was going to be a thought in her head when you guys found out that you guys were pregnant?
No, God, no. She came into my room and she said, hey, I need to tell you that I'm pregnant. And like, my heart sank because I'm thinking, okay, how is this going to change my life? What am I, like, crisis mode? Like, what do I need to do? Everything's going to be okay. I don't know how, but everything's going to be okay. And I don't remember what I said to that effect, but I said something to that effect, and she kind of stopped me and said, well, I'm not having it. And that's kind of where it landed, that she was having an abortion. And I didn't really understand that. So there was a lot of, questions and why can't we just do this? And it went beyond just me. My dad came to Florida. Her mom came from Texas, and and we all met. And my dad was very clear that he and my mom would adopt the child. It wasn't, if that would resolve the situation, I guess. It pretty much throwing out any possible solution to avoid the abortion. And and I say this not to vilify the girl, because I don't have any negative feelings towards her. I think that I can't imagine what she has had to deal with. I can't imagine what she dealt with at that time. I have no idea what has happened in her life since then, and honestly, none of that has anything to do with me. And so I say this only from the context of the fact that it happened, is that she let me know that this was not the first time that this had happened with her, and that kind of solidified in my mind that okay, like, there's literally nothing I'm going to be able to do. And so that kind of ended the conversation.
Yeah, man, that's tough, bro. In that I feel for that, because I've had friends that have admitted that occurred with them, at an early age, that happened, and it's the same scenario where they had no say, they had no ability to change, and same thing, right? Like they said, hey, have the baby, I'll take care of it. We don't have to be together. You don't have to be involved. Like, I'll watch and I'll raise the kid. Just don't get rid of the baby,
Right.
Like, and in your case, I mean, you had your parents involved, and your dad was, I mean, from what it sounds like, it seems like he was very present in your life, and both of them were there. Both of them were backing you up and trying to back you up in this hard scenario, right? And
yeah, I actually I don't know that my mom knew. I don't know that my
really?
mom knew.
Gotcha. Okay.
Until she might have found out at family day in treatment because I shut it all out. And treatment is where we determined, hey, this is what you're trying to cover. Like, this is what your void is. This is what you're trying to fill. And that's when I was given the opportunity to name the child and, to work through that. So prior to that, I'm not 100%, but I feel like my memory is correct that my mom didn't know. So my dad also internalized that for however many years.
Yeah, man, that's hard, man. And the reason why I go back to that point is because that's what kind of set it all off for you, right? Like, and you're using it as a coping mechanism. And what it makes me think of is, right now we're trying to, in Apogee and what we're doing, even with, the Father's Calling with Alpha Dad Consulting, we're trying to make an impact in our own family, in our own lives, in our own marriages, right? And do right by our children, set a good example and whatnot, right? Similar to what your dad was doing for you and being a coach and being present and, and it's a scary thought, man, to think that even if you do all of the things right, and you become the man that you should be, to know that when your child goes into adulthood, if they make a mistake or if they do something, make a decision, which we all have made bad decisions in our lives, we all do, we're all flawed humans, that it could set them on a path similar to the journey that you've had, right? And sometimes I think about that with my kids and I'm like, man, like, it's almost like you can't certify, like, or you can't make for certain that they're not going to have that. And I'm wondering if, looking back now, do you see something that could have caused you to change the trajectory of the path that you were going down? Is there some conversation that you could have had with your dad, or was it a proximity thing, right? Like we see all these kids now and the normal projection is the normal trajectory is for us to go to college, right? Like go to high school, go to college, go out and with everything going on in schools right now and what they're actually teaching, even in college, right? And we're paying for that crap, the stuff that they're indoctrinating our kids and even our young adults with nowadays is not really serving them. And, you grow up in a household where you have faith and all these stable pillars and a good environment around you. And then you go and you remove yourself from that environment. Do you think that played into the effect of why you maybe coped with it that way and didn't listen to the people that were trying to help you? You know what I mean? You just got so absorbed by that environment, like with the restaurant folks and all that. And I've seen that as well. Like, I know what you're talking about in terms of, even though I haven't been in the restaurant field myself, I saw that with my wife. My wife was in the restaurant and they had a very kind of clique type of thing going on with the restaurant people, and they all had their own vices and all that, and influence and that kind of thing as well. So I know what you're talking about with regards to that. I'm sorry, it's kind of a long-winded question, but I'm just kind of spitballing my thoughts out here because it, that's what it makes me think of as you're telling your story.
So I think that there's two things there. I think first that I, like I said earlier, with moving all the time, I never really formulated an identity. And so when I realized I wasn't going to be moving, trying to formulate that identity and figure out where I fit in, and for whatever reason, I was friends with the people I started doing drugs with before I started doing drugs, but then it became an even tighter circle of friends because it was a secret, right? We weren't putting it out there that of the 20 of us who worked in this restaurant or the 50 of us in our fraternity, that there were 8 of us who were doing this. It was just us 8 always hanging out.
Yeah.
And I felt like I belonged somewhere permanent. So I think that's part of it, and I haven't quite been able to really flesh that out 100% yet. It's something that I'm working on now. The other thing is, I don't know if there's anything my parents could have done differently. I can only talk to what I'm doing differently, knowing what the experiences that I've had. And so what I do differently is that I have these conversations. When I go and speak at events about abortion, I bring my children, and they may be the only children there because abortion's a tough topic. And, and people may think, well, why would you bring your kids to come talk about how your first baby was murdered and to talk about these things? And I would say, well, why not? Like, at what point should we begin having those conversations with our kids? So I have conversations. I mean, my kids know that, I mean, obviously I'm putting this out here, you're putting this out there for the world. So this isn't the first time I talk about this often. My kids are aware of the issues that I've been through, and I'm very open about these things with my children, these topics, because we never had any conversations. Like, we never talked about sex. We never talked about drugs. We never talked about anything beyond surface level. And so that's the difference in how I'm trying to approach this stuff, and I think that everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. I've tried coaching my kids' sports teams, and while I enjoy being around my kids, I mean, I'm not a coach. I don't get the same fulfillment out of that my dad got. And so I'm able to approach parenting my own kids a little bit differently, but I encourage them to ask questions, and I'm very open, and my wife is too, which makes it much easier. Very open and honest with our answers, and then encouraging more questions beyond that, because I don't want them to get to a point where anything is unexpected. And I know that's not possible, but I can only do the best we can do.
No, I like what you said there in terms of being honest with your children, about your background, about the flaws, man, like letting them know, like, hey, we're human. We're flawed too. We've messed up. We've made these mistakes, and that's why we're trying to correct them now. And there's a lot of power in that, I believe, because I came up with that. I came from that same kind of family where those topics were taboo. We wouldn't talk about money. We wouldn't talk about the hard conversations, right? It was always when things blew up or something was going on that you knew something was wrong, but you didn't know what was actually going on, right? And you had to find out from friends, from families, and all that stuff, from other family members, and it doesn't bode well, man. Like, but when you hear it from the horse's mouth and your parents are telling you, hey, this is what's going on, that's a different thing. My mentor used to say that moment in time when you want to talk to your kids about hard topics is when they ask, like the first time that they ask you, right? If they ask you about a hard topic or something that you're like, oh crap, like what was this 5-year-old asking me about, where babies come from or whatever it is. And he's like, that's the moment you should answer the question, of course, given the context of the age appropriate, right? But you should answer the question because that's the moment of influence that you have, he told me. And because if you don't answer that question and you ignore it and you say, hey, not right now, you're too young or whatever, right? They're going to go ask somebody else, and they're going to go find that answer somewhere else. And the answer that person might give them may set them on a path or put something in their mind that you didn't have influence on, right? And you don't know what that could be. So why give that power to someone else when they're your kids and you have the ability to do it? So I always thought that was a brilliant thing to do. And that's what I try to do with my kids, is that whenever they ask, or at least my oldest one, my 5-year-old, whenever he asks, like, I try to be as honest and open with him as possible, because I know what it's like to be omitted, right? Like from knowing what the truth is and all that. So yeah, I like that, man. I like that a lot. That you're bringing them to those conversations. Sorry, you're gonna say something. Go.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on that same note of what you're talking about is the external influences. You know, I think that I control the external influences a lot more than my parents did. And I think part of that is that I just have a much higher awareness of the external influences than my parents did. And we have an obligation today to have a higher awareness, because there's so many different things out there. And, you know, I mean, when I was 8, there was 3 channels on TV. Yeah. I'm sure it's more than that, but that's all I remember. We didn't really watch a lot of television, but I do remember being however old I was, and Revenge of the Nerds came out, and they had all the topless shots of the women, and that was something. It was almost like, because it is just taboo enough, that I remember watching it with my dad, my uncle, and my cousins. And it was almost like they wanted us to be able to watch that, right? Just because it was kind of funny to see how little boys would react to that. You know, and I'm not blaming my life on Revenge of the Nerds, but, you know, I look at it a little bit different, you know, and no judgment on anyone else for how they parent. I think parenting is hard enough without thinking that my decisions don't have anything to do with anyone else's parenting. Yeah. You know, and so I think that's an important thing to say. But when Disney began a couple of years ago to make different decisions and different values than my family holds, you know, we canceled Disney and just made a decision that until there's a course recorrection, we're not going to Disney. And, you know, and from my own standpoint, even without the kids, shows like Yellowstone. I mean, I love Yellowstone, but it got to a point where the entire show was about murder and sex. And it just started nagging on me that that's not what my life is about. And so that may or may not be the first show that I kind of made a conscious decision that, you know, this isn't really what I want to spend my time on anymore. And since then it's become much easier. You know, I can be 30 minutes into a movie that I'm really enjoying, and all of a sudden they put something out there that I wasn't expecting that goes against our family values, and just kind of shut it down because that's not aligned with my family values. And I think that doing that in front of the kids and then explaining this is why we're not watching that show anymore. It at least has, even if they don't completely understand it yet, it lets them know that their values are more important than any external source. Yeah. And so as they're formulating their values and I'm influencing their values, they're realizing that their values are more important and our values are more important than whatever the world may be saying is the right thing at this moment. So hopefully that also helps them to be more confident when situations arise in making the decision that is aligned with who they are as a person.
Yeah, no, I think that's necessary right now, man. With the culture that we have, that we're living in right now, where the nuclear family is essentially getting attacked from all angles, right? And and you're right, as vigilant, we need to be vigilant in that way, more so than probably our parents had to be, because the culture wasn't as bad. We didn't have the access that we do now to all the things, right? Just from your phone, like you can access all sorts of all sorts of good things that can help you, and all sorts of really, really bad things that can throw you off course.
Right.
So we do have to be extra vigilant. We do have to be more aware of the influence that we allow around our children, especially in shows and things like that, that, you know, will sometimes just put on, and, you know, just because it's easy, right? And I've been guilty of that, where you just put on a show and you know, but then you don't realize, well, what is the show actually teaching your kids? What are they? What sort of ideas? What sort of lessons? What sort of things are they putting in their little minds, man? When they're so impressionable at that age, right? When they're young. With that, man, what I want to do is I want to get into your family. So, you know, you're doing the treatment. You go back home. You get accepted back to your house. You and your family are working things out. So when does you forming your family come into play along that timeline?
Yeah, so that would have been at the beginning of 2006, and then, you know, I kind of floundered a little bit, just kind of figuring out what I was going to do. I actually, one of the things they tell you in recovery is to remove yourself from people, places, and things that you had in your life. And so my thought was, I'm going to start training and I'm going to go into the military, just for the purpose of exiting and getting away, starting a whole new life. Yeah. So I started doing that, and, you know, and I had some humbling experiences. You know, I was responsible for buying my own workout supplements. So I had to have a job and paying my gym membership. That was really that was my only responsibility. But it's really all I could have handled when I first got out of treatment, because the drugs really, really messed up my head. And it took years to kind of get that back. And so I worked as a bag boy in a grocery store. And this is at a time when everyone that I went to high school with had been working in a career for several years, and I'm bagging groceries. And we live in a small town, so it's not like, you know, a big city where I'm bagging groceries and never see anybody. It's like I'm at the grocery store where bagging groceries, where everyone, and I graduated top of my class. Yeah. And everyone's like coming in wondering what the hell I'm doing. And of course, none of these people knew that the journey I'd been on, you know, being on drugs, being homeless, and all that stuff. All they knew was that they'd been working in a career for several years, and now I'm bagging groceries. So that didn't really last very long. And then I started working for a restaurant where somebody that I used to work for, who is a close friend, had begun managing, and the owner of that restaurant and I became very close. You know, he ended up being my best man. Well, one night I was still planning on going to the military. One night we're sitting at the bar in the restaurant after work, and he said, "Man, don't go to the military. Why don't you just stay here and work for me for the rest of your life?" And two things happened. One was I realized that I didn't have to go to the military. That I could change people, places, and things without leaving and going and do something that I probably didn't really want to do. And two, I realized that the idea for me of waiting tables for the rest of my life sounded absolutely horrible. That is not something that I wanted to do. So disconnecting myself from the military, but realizing that what I was doing was not a permanent solution, kind of led me really quickly to reevaluate. I went back to college. I was able to convince them to let me back in. So I went back to college, and it took me another 2 years to graduate. I did really well, and I ended up getting into law school. I got into several law schools, and I probably had the lowest GPA, because you can only bring a 1.3, which is what I had when I went back to college, up so far. You could basically bring it up just enough to be able to get a diploma. And so I probably had the lowest GPA ever accepted into these law schools. But the reason that I believe I got accepted, notwithstanding that the reason is obviously because that's where God led me. The reason that I believe that I got accepted is because when you had to write personal statements, I mean, I agonized and I prayed and I finally just sat down and I said, here is all the bad things that I've done and all the good things that I've done since then and the lessons that I've learned. And I think if I hadn't done that, my credentials would not have gotten me in. And so I got in and then I graduated law school, and it was my last semester that I ran into Michelle, who is my wife. I'd actually worked with her in a restaurant one summer when she was in from school 7 years prior to that. Over the course of that 7 years, I asked her out at least a dozen times.
Wow.
And she always said yes and then canceled on me for 7 years. By the grace of God, because I was a mess and that never would have worked if we had gone out while I was doing drugs, because that's not who she is. Yeah. And so 2010, we went on a date. It was like next week, 2010. So right at 13 years ago. And we went on a date and we've been dating ever since. So when I graduated law school, I came back here to Lake Charles. I went to work for a law firm, a small law firm. I worked there for a couple of years, realized that I didn't want to be making money for other people, and opened my own law firm. I was also a prosecutor for about 7 or 8 months, because as a prosecutor with the DA's office, I was able to have a side practice. I expected that would last for at least a year, but my side practice just blew up. And so then I was working part-time at the DA's office, and finally there was no way I could do that. So I just went all in on myself, and that went really well. And I had a very successful career, considering how short of a career it was. I started my own practice in January of 2015, maybe 2014, 2015. And then I stopped practicing in 2021.
Okay.
Because it didn't take long for me to realize how much I hated it. I was a divorce and custody lawyer, and I think that's exactly where God wanted me. I stayed in it longer than I needed to because I believed that God put me there for a reason. I finally came to the conclusion that whatever that reason was had been fulfilled, because it was just not something that I had any interest in doing.
Yeah.
And it was taking me away from my family. So we had our first child in 2014, our second child in 2016. They're young enough that by the time they watch this, they'll understand why I'm not positive about that. But I think that's right. And I was just working all the time. And Michelle has her own dental practice. So I'm working all the time to build a practice. She's working all the time to build a practice. And we're just paying people to take care of our kids.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And so that really weighed on me, because that's not who I wanted to be. And I always felt guilty. Like, I just kind of was guilty 100% of the time, because I had obligations I had to do for my clients. I had obligations I had to do for the law firm. And I don't care what anybody says about your kids aren't going to remember the first couple of years. I disagree.
Yeah.
I think that, Nick Freitas posted something the other day, and he said, your 18-year-old may not remember what you did when they were 2, but your 3-year-old does, and your 5-year-old remembers when they were 3, and your 8-year-old remembers when they were 5, and just kind of pulling it out like that. And I believe that we influence our children from very, very early. And I think to ignore that is just to lie to yourself. And so I wanted to be home, and we just decided, actually in 2018, we decided, we were on a church retreat, a family church retreat, and we had just adopted our third child, or he had just been born. We hadn't adopted him yet. He'd just been born, so he was with us. And we just both felt like we heard God saying, hey, you're going to be okay. Like, Sean needs to stop practicing and help take care of the family. And Michelle can grow her practice, which she's extremely passionate about. And your family is going to be just fine. And so we both heard that. We made that decision. That was November of 2018. I came back and had 5 or 6 of the best months at work that I'd ever had. And so, and that's how everything gets in your way is all of a sudden I'm making more money than I've ever made, and forgetting about all the stress and the prayers and the message from God. And so it didn't happen. But like everything else, when you start listening to that other voice, it doesn't last long because it's not real. So long story short, just in August of 2021, I stopped taking clients, and it's taken until last month to finish up the work that I had to do or shift the clients that I had remaining to other attorneys, which was incredibly hard because I felt obligated to help those people.
Of course.
But my obligation to my family and to myself, I think, is much greater. And they all understood. Like, I probably should have had those conversations months and months before.
Yeah.
But I had those conversations. And so now I have 0 clients, and I'm helping Michelle to grow her dental practice. We've also adopted 2 more kids. So now we have 5 kids, 8 and under. We have an 8-year-old, a 7-year-old, 2 5-year-olds, and a 4-year-old.
Nice.
And, and I'm working really hard to be as present as I can at all times and to not get distracted by work. Not just be present, to not say, hey, we're going to adopt these kids because we can provide them with a good life. But whenever they're around, we're going to ignore them because we're so focused on work. Yeah. But to be, really present, to the point where this summer I experimented thinking that I might homeschool this year. So this summer we went to Colorado, and I stayed in Colorado with the 5 kids while Michelle commuted every weekend, worked here in Louisiana, and then commuted back on the weekends, and thinking that it would be a good experience to see if I could be a stay-at-home dad, and then if everything worked, to homeschool this year. Just to kind of remove even some more of those external influences that are kind of creeping up as my kids get older.
For sure.
And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about my kids. I learned a lot about myself. And I learned a lot about what it is that God wants me to do. I think God wants me to be a present father. I do not think God wants me to be a stay-at-home dad. I can say with 100% certainty that God does not want me to homeschool my children. It was really, really hard. I have a lot of amazing feelings towards anyone who homeschools their kids. I think that it is underrated how difficult that is to not only be a stay-at-home parent with a bunch of kids, but also to homeschool them. I think God bless those people. Like they have a gift that I do not have, and so my kids are back in school. They go to an Acton Academy here.
Nice. Nice.
So it's not traditional school, but and we do have a little bit more influence. Than we, because it's small, than we would if they were at a regular school. But
for sure, I want to touch on the family, or sorry, the practice, right, the law practice that you had, because this is something that I run into a lot with some of the guys that I talk to, in terms of, because you were on that side, man, of being pretty much on. I'm assuming you were defending the man, right, like in these divorce battles, or was it always kind of a mix of both, in terms of divorce court and divorce law and all that, fighting custody battles? Because I've seen some of that, man, and it's a ugly battlefield. Like it's really ugly in terms of how it gets. I've seen instances where, and again, no judgment here, but this is just what I've seen, is like a woman will cheat, right, for a number of years, and file a, what is it called, a restraining order against the man, right, falsely accusing them of like rape or something like that, just so that they could keep custody of the children, right? Go to court, and then if you're like in a no fault state, you can't even bring up the infidelity or anything that would blemish, whoever the person that messed up it, in the relationship, why the divorce is happening in the first place, type of thing, right? And then all of a sudden you have the dad that just gets stripped of his custody. He gets stripped of, now he's got to pay child support. Now he's got to do, like, it seems like the court system is like stacked up against the dad. At least that's the perception that I've gotten, and a lot of these divorce lawyers that don't have ethics, right, that don't have, like, they're really quick to jump on making money, man, and being in that courtroom for as long as freaking possible, fighting that custody battle and making it even worse. Because in the case that I saw, I think the scumbag lawyer that was on the opposing side was sort of informing her, like, hey, do this, right, like, say this, and accuse him of rape, falsely accuse these things, and put these allegations out there, because that's what's going to give you more power in the courtroom against the judge and all that. So I'm just wondering, like, what did some of those things, I mean, I'm sure you witnessed a lot of those things. Can you think of a case where you saw something like that, and maybe, or that you took on, where you guys won, on the dad side, and what that was like, and what was your experience like in terms of being in that world? And was that something that, when you saw how bad the court system is, as that kind of would force you to be like, man, I need to get out of here. I can't be in this environment anymore. Sorry, again, long-winded question, but I was just curious.
That's a great question.
Terms of what, yeah.
So I think that my experience, and I've heard stories like what you're describing as well. I do not believe that the judges here we have parishes in Louisiana and not counties, but in Calcasieu Parish, I do not believe that the judges here are biased towards the mother.
Okay.
And so, but I do think that, and maybe that's because they're all dads, honestly. Mm-hmm. Like the judges, the hearing officers, I mean, they're all dads. Like, yeah. So they're biased towards good people. And for the most part, I think that our judges would like there to be shared custody in any situation that it's possible. But what I did find that you brought up is attorneys, and this is something that really kind of steered me away from it. Attorneys who create situations, prey on the vulnerability of clients at their weakest moment to create situations to make money, sending inflammatory letters that don't matter. And this is what happens. I created, my value around, I'm not responding to an inflammatory letter just because it's inflammatory if it doesn't have anything to do with the case. Mm-hmm. And but the clients, receive a letter or hear that I've received a letter that says all these negative things about them, even though none of it's true.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have anything to do with the case, and it's not going to impact the case at all. And they want to say something back.
Yeah.
And so if you have an attorney on both sides who is willing to take that, I mean, you're talking easy $50,000
Yeah.
and each,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't have $50,000 to spend on a divorce when at the end of the day, you're driving hate as an attorney. You're driving hate, and not all attorneys, but I saw that, and that's something that impacted me, and something that I made a decision. I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to participate in it, and certainly as that became a point where it was more difficult to get away from, I think that helped me to make the decision to walk away. As far as I can tell you, the case that had the most impact on me, and I believe that all the right decisions were made. I represented the mom, and in this case, I believe that there were some things going on with dad that he really needed to work on, beyond just surface level issues, like some deeper psychological things that were creating problems for everyone. And so we went through trial, and, but the entire time we were in trial, I just had nagging in the back of my head, what if I'm wrong? Because as an attorney, we take the information that our client gives us.
Yeah.
We seek information to support that. We move forward with that, the assumption that our client's telling us the truth. And you have to. Like
Of course.
if you don't believe your client's telling the truth, you need to not represent them. And so, but I just had this feeling that if I'm wrong, this man will never have the relationship with his child that he otherwise would have had. And like I said, it was a very complex case. I have no concerns about whether or not I was right or wrong, but having that feeling and having that thought impacted how I thought about all of my cases.
Yeah.
Because that's always the situation. And other attorneys that I'm friends with would say, well, it's my job to represent this person. It's the other attorney's job to represent the other person. I mean, the other person's attorney's job to represent the other person. The issue that I have with that is, what that means is, if you have a dishonest client who has a better attorney, then that might create the situation that you're describing with your friend. Like, you have a better attorney, better meaning whatever it means, more vicious. Like, people like to use the term bulldog, and I mean, I had to tell several people would come in and they'd say, well, this is who my attorney is, and I need somebody more aggressive. And I just say, look, if you want somebody more aggressive than that person, you're in the wrong office. Like, I am not approaching a divorce and custody case the way that person does. So I'm not the right attorney for you, because I just want peace. I want the kids to be happy, and I want them to be around whichever parents they should be around, and to not destroy relationships. But there's plenty of lawyers out there who are in this for the money, and it's easy money. It's easy money because people are scared. They don't know what to do. They feel like their world's falling apart. They really need help. They'll trust anyone because they don't trust the person that they've put all their trust in for their entire marriage. So now they need somebody to trust, and you're at that right point at that right time. And with the wrong intentions, it's easy to prey on that vulnerability and create situations to bill.
Yeah.
And then, and these attorneys that I, at least locally, that I know that practice that way, settle at the end because the money's gone. It's like hardcore. All of a sudden, last week we were fighting to the death, today, hey, let's reach a settlement.
Yeah.
There's no more money. Like, let's reach a settlement and I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
And I think that creates just as much discord as any other external force in the dissolution of a marriage.
Yeah.
You know, I like I said, I've not personally experienced any. You know, I take that back. I had a guy who was a great dad. He worked really hard, and because he worked really hard, he wasn't home all the time. But he was working really hard for his family, and he wasn't doing anything he shouldn't be doing. And the mom started dating somebody else and just took off and moved 8 hours away into Texas.
Jeez.
And we had a judge here who ordered her to bring the child back very regularly. Like, I mean, the kid was missing school, and the judge was like, he's 5. He'll be fine. Like, if he misses a day of school every 2 weeks, he's going to be just fine. And, you know, but once she was in Texas for long enough, she was able to move the jurisdiction to Texas, and the judge there disagreed. And so the kid, and the guy, he just loved his kids, and, you know, that's it. Like, she did this so that he will never see the child again.
Jeez, man.
And so yeah, I mean, that did happen.
Yeah.
And that's a really unfortunate.
Yeah. The perspective that you gave, man, on praying on those vulnerable moments, you know, that's something that I've witnessed, and it's just, and you're right. I've never heard it articulated the way that you said it, because you're saying it from the perspective of these lawyers, and you're right. You know, they're in a heightened emotional state, feeling as vulnerable as all. They don't trust the ex, right, or the person that they no longer want to be with. And yeah, like, in comes these sly lawyers that say all the right things, that know all the laws and everything that they can use to take advantage of. And it's an ugly thing, man. And it shows you the importance of, one, you know, picking the right partner, picking the right woman, right, and making sure that you guys have all your values and your morals and your beliefs, like everything, you know, despite maybe your personalities and all that, of course, that those are always different. But as long as you align in those values and you guys understand, like, hey, we're committed, we're in this for the long haul, and we're going to make this marriage work, right? But when you pick the wrong one, man, or you allow, I'd say you allow as kind of a family leader, the influence to come in, and maybe not only are you protected of your influence that comes in on your kids, but also the influence that your wife may have, you know, because granted, as much as we go to a job and spend 8-10 hours a day at a job away from our wife, and in most cases, most men, they go to an office or they go to a place to work away from their family. You got to keep in mind that your wife, in most cases, is doing the same thing, right? And she's being influenced as well. She's being influenced by other external factors as well. And how you guys both need to be strong in that regard. And if you guys aren't aligned and all that, that's, I think, where a lot of these things happen, right? Where the divorce, the separation, when you're not working at your marriage and you're not pouring, like, I love how you said that you're still dating your wife. Like, that's beautiful, man. It's beautifully stated, because that's what we need to do. Matt Beaudreau always talks about, you know, the continual pursuit of your wife. And in a lot of marriages, that doesn't happen, and it causes this division. It causes for either the guy or the gal to look somewhere else for those needs, right? And then that's where infidelity starts. That's where those things happen, and those affairs. And man, and it's really sad to see, bro, that the kids and what they go through with those separations, right? And having, like, that example you just gave of traveling between Texas and over there in Louisiana, and getting full custody, even though it was the woman that decided to go and be with someone else and move 8 hours away. Like, you know, all right, cool. That's your decision. That's your prerogative. Go and do, you know, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like, yeah, but they'll take advantage, man. Some people will take advantage of that. And it's just, it's so sad, man. the people that I feel the most for are the kids that are involved, because there's so much trauma that occurs, especially at a young age like that. When that happens, that it's really sad. My son, actually, we were on a walk last week, and he starts he brought it up. Like he asked me about, where he see, because he's starting to pick up and see, like, hey, certain kids don't have a dad, certain kids don't have a mom, certain kids don't have parents and all that. And so he's starting to get curious and asking questions, and I was explaining kind of those things to him, and and you could see the light bulbs hitting his head, and he was just like, wow, like that actually happens, because he's so used to seeing me, and I work from home, right? So he sees me all the time. He sees my wife stay at home. Like, we're here, we're present all the time with them. Like, so they need something, that we're here,
Yeah.
So he's so used to having that seeing that's his norm, that he has access to dad, he has access to mom continually. And when he notices other kids that don't have that, he starts kind of questioning and figuring that out. And I pretty much told him, I was like, yeah, bud, like, this is why mom and I, like, we're a team, and why we work hard to stay a team, right? And to love each other, and to continue raising you guys in the best way possible, and all these things. And it was clicking for him, so it's interesting to see how that happens, man. And if had, our story, and had we not decided to do and to come back from what we came back from, that wouldn't be the case, man. Like, we'd be suffering separation and suffering those things for our kids. And it's just, it's crazy, man. It's I wanted to touch on that because I love your perspective on it. And I wanted to get your perspective from being in that world and all that. Next is, I wanted to talk a little bit about the adoption side, right? Because you've had that experience as well. And what sort of prompted you and Michelle to kind of dive into wanting to adopt kids, and sort of jump into that world as well?
Yeah. So when we first got married, I had it in my head that I wanted to have 10 kids. She did not. And a little discussion about this, but I believe at some point we actually had a compromise at 6.
Okay.
So there was a plan going into getting married that that we were agreeing to have 6 kids. Now, this is in spite of the fact that we didn't get married. I mean, I was 35 when we got married. So, and we're running 2 businesses. So the idea that we're going to just knock out 6 kids is really unrealistic. But that's the plan. So we had our first child in 2014, end of 2014. And our daughter, Zizi, was born in the beginning of 2016. So 14 months apart. So Michelle had C-sections for both. And this is actually a funny story. So when we decided to start having a family, we were very technical about it. Like, we had ovulation tests. We had, like, we knew where the position of the moon with the stars and the tides, and how that was affecting whether or not she was going to get pregnant. Yeah. And in spite of all that, it took 8 months. So all that stuff was wrong. When John Francis, our first son, was, I don't know, maybe 5 months old, we said, okay, it took us 8 months to get pregnant the first time. So obviously it's going to take us 8 months to get pregnant again. And if we start now, then they'll be right at 2 years apart. And so she got pregnant that day. But she didn't know that we had a trip coming up in June, and she'd been breastfeeding, so she hadn't had a drink in, the entire time she was pregnant, the entire time she was breastfeeding, and the plan was to breastfeed until he was 6 months old. Okay. And he was going to be 6 months old in June, or maybe it was July, and then to stop. So so her plan was to stop breastfeeding for this trip or on this trip. And that was going to be the first time she'd had a drink. So we're going to Florida to the beach for a week. And it was just arguing the whole way there. It was, and not even just nonsense arguments. Like she's arguing with me about things that just don't make any sense. And finally, instead of like fighting back, I just said, man, this is so weird. I'll bet you're pregnant. And I could see that it kind of shook her a little. And so being the amazing loving husband I am, I just harped on it for the rest of jokingly, because what are the chances? So I just harped on it jokingly for the rest of the drive. And then we get to the grocery store when we got to Florida, and we were there for 7 days. So she bought herself 7 bottles of wine and pregnancy tests. And I mean, I'm still like making really light of it. I'm in the grocery store, and I see her come around the corner with the cart and the pregnancy test, and I just yelled like loud, pregnancy tests, like just to try to embarrass her. We get to the hotel, and she pours a glass of wine, and then she said, well, I guess I should just go take this. And she came out of the bathroom bawling, just like she just uncontrollable crying. And she was like, I just wanted 1 week. And, you know, and that's how we found out that she was pregnant. It was right at 6 months. So our kids are 14 months apart. So she was pregnant or breastfeeding for a solid 2.5 years. And it really affected her emotionally, hormonally and emotionally. And she kind of kept that in. I didn't know that until our daughter was like 18 months old. And we finally had a conversation about it, because she has her own dental practice. So she only took like 3 weeks off, and then she was back chairside with patients. Yeah. And it didn't help that she had an OB who like went back to delivering babies when her child was 2 days old, and like was very proud of that. So then Michelle felt like she had to be able to do that because there's this other person that she knows that can do it. But it really affected her. And when we finally got to that point where we had that conversation, and, you know, I was like, well, what if we just adopted? And that just relieved all the tension. Because she was feeling stressed because she knew I wanted a big family, but she didn't ever want to be pregnant again. And I think just kind of having that conversation was very helpful. So we had that conversation, and I talked to a buddy of mine who has adopted a couple of kids, and I said, hey, so we've decided we want to adopt. What do we need to do? And he said, well, here are the things that you need to do. And he's an attorney as well. We started the process. I think we scheduled our appointment with the social worker. That's it. That's how far we got. Mm-hmm. We're driving back from Houston one day, and my buddy, the attorney, calls me and he said, hey, this baby was just born. The OB called me to see if I knew anybody who was looking to adopt a baby. Do you guys want it? And we were like, yeah. So completely unprepared. Yeah. And knew nothing about him. We actually misheard, and we spent the rest of the trip from Houston to Lake Charles picking out girls' names. Had a beautiful girl's name picked out. We got to the hospital. It wasn't until like we got to the hospital and realized that our beautiful new daughter had a penis, that it was a boy. And so that's when we first brought Henry into our life. And it was just a situation where, you know, it's actually, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is, you know, a full circle situation. Mm-hmm. This is a mom who didn't know who the dad was on drugs, knew that she was not going to raise this child, but also chose not to have an abortion. Like, chose to go 9 months, as unstable as her life was, as unable as she was to take care of this child, knowing that she was going to be giving this child up for someone else, and made that choice to give Henry his life and to give us, this beautiful baby. And so, I think it really is kind of a crazy, just full circle experience from, when I was 19. And so we picked Henry up like that day. I think he had to stay in the hospital, so they were watching him to see if he had anything in his system that they needed to worry about. But he ended up being perfectly fine. And so like we spent the next couple of days like at Target buying all the stuff we needed for a baby and building bunk beds and moving beds around. And we weren't ready for this at all.
Yeah.
And so that kind of drug out the process because we hadn't finished any of the social worker stuff. But after a year, we were able to adopt Henry. And then in 2020, we had some hurricanes here. And after that, shortly after the hurricanes, Michelle said, "Hey, look, my cousin or my aunt has got emergency custody of her 2 great-grandchildren. And they are 1 and 2. And I told her that we would adopt them."
So she
like,
made the decision. So she said, yeah.
And I was like, all right, great. Now the great grandparents weren't in that position. They had lost. So the reason it was the great grandparents is because the grandparents had actually Michelle's cousins had actually died of. I think he died of cancer. And then his ex-wife had also died of cancer. And so it's Michelle's cousins' kids. But she was bad off, man. She was on drugs. Dad was in jail for looting houses after the hurricanes. And that was much more difficult because also drugs in their system. But where with Henry, he had no influence from anyone other than us.
Yeah.
These kids had been taken away from their parents for a reason. Whether the children themselves were actually physically abused, I'm not sure. But I know that the little girl who was it was just before her first birthday when she was taken away, would just be shut in a room so they wouldn't have to listen to her cry.
Yeah.
The little boy, on the day they took him away, that the great grandparents got him, was like screaming in a high chair in front of, like with food in front of him that looked like it was several days old. And mom and dad were beating the hell out of each other all the time.
Yeah.
So we're not really exactly sure what happened. But whatever happened, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about, people say your kids aren't going to remember what happened when they're 1 and 2. And I mean, I can prove to you that that's wrong because these kids have trauma from that time.
Oh, for sure.
We're still, 4 years later or 3 years later, still dealing with like helping them to kind of work through some of that. And they don't know what it was.
Yeah.
They don't know what happened because they were just babies, but it's clear that they are still working through influences that occurred when they were that young. And so, so that's kind of how we ended up with Elijah and Sophia. We had to sit down and have a conversation with her great grandparents and say, look, with Michelle's aunt, and say, look, your you're 75, your husband needs 2 knee replacements. You're living in a trailer because your house was destroyed in a hurricane with 2 babies and your mother-in-law who's 90 something because her house was destroyed in a hurricane. Like, we can help you. And there was a lot of fear that they had because they'd lost their son and they felt like they were losing their grandchild, even though it was her fault, you know, her decisions that were causing that. They didn't want these children to feel like they'd been abandoned by their family. And so we just made it really clear that, you know, we're not trying to take them from you. Like, you're still their grandparents. And, you know, and they're super active. They have been like, they're going to have them, visit with them pretty much every weekend. So, and it's awesome, you know, that the kids get to see their grandparents every weekend. So we finally, once they felt more comfortable that they were going to be able to be very active in the lives of the grandkids, but that they were going to be able to be grandparents and not be parents to these kids. They felt a lot more comfortable. And so we had living with us, we had Elijah and Sophia from about May of 2021. We got legal custody of them in, I think, October of 2021, maybe. And then we were able to adopt them in August of this year. Mom and Dad, of course, just like popped up, and like Dad got out of jail and it was like, I want to be super dad. And so it was a little contested, but they didn't contest it to the point where they actually did what was required by the court. So, so now we don't have to worry about them. And look, no ill will against Mom. I don't know Dad, so I don't really have anything to say about him. But you know, Michelle's cousin, if one day she figures out whatever it is she needs to figure out, and I believe in redemption. I mean, if not, like, I have no leg to stand on, right? Yeah. So if she figures out whatever she needs to figure out, and it's possible to reintroduce her in some capacity, I'm not really against that, but she's not there yet. So, and that would have to involve counselors or somebody who can explain how that would impact the kids psychologically. But but that's it. Like, 5 is the number. We're not going for 6. I've learned at 5 that that 6 is not the number. 6 may have been a goal. It's kind of like Matt Boder says all the time. Perfection is always the goal, even though it's not attainable. I feel like 6 was a good goal, but for our family, it was not attainable. And 5 is the right number, and provides just the right amount of challenges every day for all of us to grow as a family and grow together.
Yeah, that's great, man. Yeah, congrats on the newest adoptions finally going through as well, and man, you guys are awesome that you guys took it upon yourselves to come in and, you know, and take these kids and become their parents, man. Like, so many kids out there that don't have that available to them. They don't have people. They grow up in those scenarios that you described, and then they stay there. You know, they remain in that the rest of their lives. And then, you know, we get kids that grow up and go into society with that trauma and all sorts of after effects that happen from that. It's just doesn't bode well for society as a whole, doesn't bode well for families as a whole. So having people like yourself and Michelle to come in and actually say, like, hey, like, we're gonna take care of these kids and we're gonna step in. So whether it's 5, 6, 3, doesn't matter, man. You guys did it. So that's right. Cool. We're on that. But
it's 5.
It's 5. It's 5.
It's not 6.
Yeah.
I'm not challenging God, because I know that's what creates new situations, but for sure, I feel very confident right now that God does not have any more kids in store for us.
Yeah, man. When they're under 10 like that, it's rough. It's not easy. We're right now with 3, And we're debating. We're like, are we done, or do we really want to go? Because I was like you, man. I was like, yeah, I want to have a freaking soccer team. Like I want.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom comes from a family of 9. And so it's like, so we joke with my mom, and I tell her, like, yeah, I want like 10, or I want like 11 kids, or 5 kids, or whatever. And she's like, she says it in Spanish, right? Estás loco. She's like, you're crazy. And I'm like, yeah, but I say it jokingly now. But now that we got the third one right now, the infant, the little
Yeah.
3-month-old, almost, he's gonna be 4 months. No, it's the second. He's gonna be 4 months in a couple of days, man, which is crazy to
That's
think
awesome.
about. Yeah, and he's starting to giggle. He's starting to do all this, love it, but little dude won't take a nap during the day, man. He won't nap, and he's tired. Like, he's there rubbing his eyes, and he's tired. Like, dude, just go to sleep. Every time she puts him down, he wakes up. The other ones are running around. They wake him up too when he finally naps, and it's just it's fun, man. But at the same time, it is challenging. It's not easy, and yeah, we're on that train right now. Or do we want to, or do we not want to, or what's that look like for us? So it's still a conversation that we're having right now.
Well, don't rush it.
Yeah,
I feel like you're a few years younger than me, so I think you'll be all right.
Yeah, I'm not trying to, man. We'll see how it goes. All right, brother. Well, I want to hit you with the last question.
Yeah.
That I always hit all my guests with, and that is, what do you think are the traits that make up, or the few traits, I should say, that make up a good family leader, that make a dad a good family leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that intentionality is probably number one. I think consistency is super important. I think discipline is super important. But consistency and discipline without intentionality, while it may get you something, may not get you what it is that you really want. So I think that by being intentional, and intentionality is a little harder than discipline. Discipline says, I'm going to wake up every day at 5 a.m., regardless of whether I feel like it or not. And the first thing I'm going to do is, whatever the first thing you do in the morning is, doesn't really matter. And then doing it, like, that's discipline. Intentionality says, the reason I'm going to wake up at 5 o'clock every morning is because I need to do these 3 things before my kids wake up. And the reason I'm doing these 3 things is to become the man that I want to be the leader of my family, or to knock those things out before the kids are up, so that when the kids wake up, I can be completely present and be the man that I want to be the leader of my family. And I think that in my own journey, I've found that consistency, which I started just with myself, learning how to be consistent, learning how to be disciplined. And now what I see is the need in the house to create consistency and discipline of action with my children, so that they don't have to relearn all that when they're in their 40s. And it's hard. Look, man, it's hard to run a morning with 5 little kids running around, if there's no consistency, if there's not a plan. And so it can create a lot of stress. And on the mornings when things are inconsistent, it leads to stressful situations all around. And that stress, comes from the kids, goes to the kids, comes from the parents, goes to the parents, whatever. But, I want to avoid those stressful situations. And the easiest way to avoid that is through doing the same thing and just being really consistent, or at least being consistent about what our goals are. And I really think intentionality around all of that is the most important thing. I think that if you, was it Alice in Wonderland where the Cheshire Cat said, if you don't know where you're going, then it doesn't matter which path you take. And I think that that's really important. Like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? Why are we trying to accomplish it? And then what do we need to be disciplined about and consistent about doing in order to accomplish that?
Yeah, I like that, man. Intentionality for sure, because it starts there, right? Like you figuring out your why, figuring out the reasons as to why you're being disciplined, as to why you're doing this, and showing up the way they need you to. It's such an important factor. And of course, consistency, we talk about that in Apogee all the time, putting the reps in, right? Like a lot of the times it is about that, but if you don't have that intentionality behind it, then what's the point, right? What's the reason? So love that answer, man. Appreciate you. Yeah. All right, brother. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you, man. And, so tell us how we can support you. Where can we find you? Where can our listeners and our watchers on YouTube be able to go support you and support what you got going on right now? Because I'm excited for what this next phase of your life is going to look like right now, which is because you got a lot of good things going on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So currently I'm working on a podcast and a blog called The Father's Calling. It is my own journey on trying to become a better man, better leader for my family, better father, and a better husband, and kind of sharing that with everyone else as I go along it. The website is thefatherscalling.com. And, out of consistency, the YouTube is at The Father's Calling, and Instagram is at The Father's Calling. And, and I'm just kind of trying to grow that. And as I learn on my own how to become better at what it is that is really important to me, to just share that with anyone who is interested. And there's more projects in the works as far as that's concerned. I've started writing a book on fatherhood, and I'll put that out there right now to kind of hold me accountable to completing it. But and there's a couple other things that go along with that'll be coming in the next 3 to 6 months.
That sounds awesome, man. We're definitely gonna hold you to the book. I want to see that come to fruition, and then we're gonna bring you back on the show, man, so that way you can talk about the book, talk about the principles in the book, and then be able to promote it as well, man, so that we get it in people's hands. Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. All right, Sean. Well, I appreciate your time, brother. And we will catch up soon, man. We'll be seeing each other right now here in a week shortly. Getting to meet in person. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah. All right, G. I appreciate it, man.
All right, brother. Thank you for checking out this episode. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sean. If this helped you in any way, all I ask is that you pass it along and share it with another family man. All right, my fellow Alpha Dad, I'll catch you on the next one.
1, 2, 3 actions I didn't meet. 4, 5, 6 fear and silence begin to mix. 7, 8, 9 the thought of being emotionless started taking over my mind.